Emma, written by Jane Austen and read by staff from Birmingham Libraries. Volume 3, Chapter 9. Emma's pensive meditations as she walked home were not interrupted, but on entering the parlour she found those who must rouse her. Mr. Knightley and Harriet had arrived during her absence, and were sitting with her father. Mr. Knightley immediately got up, and in a manner decidedly graver than usual said, "I would not go away without seeing you, but I have no time to spare, and therefore must now be gone directly. I am going to London to spend a few days with John and Isabella. Have you anything to send or say besides the love which nobody carries?" "Nothing at all. But is not this a sudden scheme?" "Yes, rather. I have been thinking of it some little time." Emma was sure he had not forgiven her. He looked unlike himself. Time, however, she thought, would tell him that they ought to be friends again. While he stood, as if meaning to go, but not going, her father began his inquiries. "Well, my dear, and did you get there safely? And how did you find my worthy old friend and her daughter? I dare say they must have been very much obliged to you for coming. Dear Emma has been on call to Mrs. and Miss Bates. Mr. Knightley, as I told you before, she's always so attentive with them." Emma's colour was heightened by this unjust praise, and with a smile and a shake of the head which spoke much, she looked at Mr. Knightley. It seemed as if there were an instantaneous impression in her favour, as if his eyes received the truth from hers, and all that had passed of good in her feelings were at once caught and honoured. He looked at her with a glow of regard. She was warmly gratified, and in another moment still more so, by a little movement of more than a common friendliness on his part. He took her hand. Whether she had not herself made the first motion she could not say. She might, perhaps, have rather offered it. But he took her hand, pressed it, and certainly was on the point of carrying it to his lips when, from some fancy or other, he suddenly let it go. Why he should feel such a scruple, why he should change his mind when it has all but done, she could not perceive. He would have judged better, she thought, if he had not stopped. The intention, however, was undutable, and whether it was that his manners had in general so little gallantry, or however else it happened, but she thought nothing became him more. It was with him of so simple yet so dignified a nature. She could not but recall the attempt with great satisfaction. It spoke such perfect amity. He left them immediately afterwards, gone in a moment. He always moved with the alertness of a mind which could neither be undecided nor dilatory, but now he seemed more sudden than usual in his disappearance. Emma could not regret her having gone to Miss Bates, but she wished she had left her 10 minutes earlier. It would have been a great pleasure to talk over Jane Fairfax's situation with Mr. Knightley. Neither would she regret that he should be going to Brunswick Square, for she knew how much his visit would be enjoyed. But it might have happened at a better time, and to have had longer notice of it would have been pleasanter. They parted thorough friends. However, she could not be deceived as to the meaning of his countenance and his unfinished gallantry. It was all done to assure her that she was fully recovered in his good opinion. He had been sitting with them for half an hour, she found. It was a pity that she had not come back earlier. In the hope of diverting her father's thoughts from the disagreeableness of Mr. Knightley's going to London, and going so suddenly, and going on horseback, which she knew would all be very bad, Emma communicated her news of Jane Fairfax, and her dependence on the effect was justified. It supplied a very useful check. Interested, without disturbing him. He had long made up his mind to Jane Fairfax's going out of governess, and could talk of it cheerfully, but Mr. Knightley's going to London had been an unexpected blow. "I am very glad indeed, my dear, to hear she is to be so comfortably settled. Mrs. Elton is a very good-natured and agreeable, and I dare say her acquaintance are just what they ought to be. I hope it is a dry situation, and that her health will be taken good care of. It ought to be a first object, as I am sure Miss Poor Taylor's always was with me. You know, my dear, she is going to be this new lady what Miss Taylor was to us, and I hope she will be better off in one respect, and not to be induced to go away after it has been her home for so long." The following day brought news from Richmond to throw everything else into the background. An express arrived at Randalls to announce the death of Mrs. Churchill. Though her nephew had had no particular reason to hasten back on her account, she had not lived above 36 hours after his return. A sudden seizure of a different nature from anything foreboded by her general state had carried her off for a short struggle. The great Mrs. Churchill was no more. It was felt as such things must be felt. Everybody had a degree of gravity and sorrow, tenderness towards the departed, solicitude for the surviving friends, and in a reasonable time curiosity to know where she would be buried. Goldsmith tells us that when the lovely woman stoops to folly, she has nothing to do but to die, and when she stoops to be disagreeable, it is equally to be recommended as the clearer of ill fame. Mrs. Churchill, after being disliked at least 25 years, was now spoken of with compassionate allowances. In one point she was fully justified. She had never been admitted before to be seriously ill. The event acquitted her of all the fancifulness and all the selfishness of imaginary complaints. Poor Mrs. Churchill! No doubt she had been suffering a great deal, more than anybody had ever supposed, and continual pain would try the temper. It was a sad event, a great shock. With all her faults, what would Mr. Churchill do without her? Mr. Churchill's loss would be dreadful indeed. Mr. Churchill would never get over it. Even Mr. Weston shook his head and looked solemn, and said, "Ah, poor woman, who would have thought it?" and resolved that his mourning should be as handsome as possible, and his wife sat sighing and moralising over her broad hems, with the commiseration and good sense true and steady. How it would affect Frank was amongst the earliest thoughts of both. It was also a very early speculation with Emma. The character of Mrs. Churchill, the grief of her husband, her mind glanced over them with awe and compassion, and then rested with lightened feeling on how Frank might be affected by the event. How benefited, how freed! She saw in a moment all the possible good. Now an attachment to Harriet Smith have nothing to encounter. Mr. Churchill, independent of his wife, was feared by nobody, an easy, guidable man, to be persuaded into anything by his nephew. All that remained to be wished was that the nephew should form the attachment. As with all her goodwill in the cause, Emma could feel no certainty of its being already formed. Harriet behaved extremely well on the occasion, with great self-command. Whatever she might feel of brighter hope, she betrayed nothing. Emma was gratified to observe such a proof of her strengthened character, and refrained from any allusion that might endanger its maintenance. They spoke, therefore, of Mrs. Churchill's death with mutual forbearance. Short letters from Frank were received at Randalls, communicating all that was immediately important of their state and plans. Mr. Churchill was better than could be expected, and their first removal on the departure of the funeral from Yorkshire was to be the house of a very old friend in Windsor, to whom Mr. Churchill had been promising a visit for the last 10 years. At present there was nothing to be done for Harriet. Good wishes for the future were all that could yet be possible on Emma's side. it was a more pressing concern to shew attention to Jane Fairfax, whose prospects were closing, while Harriet opened, and whose engagements now allowed of no delay in any one at Highbury who wished to shew her kindness, and with Emma it was grown into a first wish. She had scarcely a stronger regret than for her past coldness, and the person whom she had been so many months neglecting was now the very one on whom she would have lavished every distinction or regard or sympathy. She wanted to be of use to her, wanted to shew a value for her society, and testify respect and consideration. She resolved to prevail on her to spend a day at Hartfield. A note was written to urge it. The invitation was refused, and by a verbal message Miss Fairfax was not well enough to write, and when Mr. Perry called at Hartfield the same morning, it appeared that she was so much indisposed as to have been visited, though against her own consent, by himself, that she was suffering under severe headaches and a nervous fever to a degree which made him doubt the possibility of her going to Mrs. Smallridge's at the time proposed. Her health seemed for the moment completely deranged, appetite quite gone, and though there were no absolutely alarming symptoms, nothing touched the pulmonary complaint which the standing oppression of the family. Mr. Perry was uneasy about her. He thought she was undertaken more than she was equal to, and that she felt it so herself, though she would not own it. Her spirits seemed overcome. Her present home, he could not but observe, was unfavourable to a nervous disorder, confined always to one room. He could have wished it otherwise. And her good aunt, though his very old friend, he must acknowledge to be not the best companion for an invalid of that description. Her care and attention could not be questioned. They were, in fact, only too great. He very much feared that Miss Fairfax derived more evil than good from them. Emma listened with the warmest concern, grieved for her more and more, and looked around eager to discover some way of being useful, to take her, be it only an hour or two, from her aunt, to give her change of air and scene, and quite rational conversation, even for an hour or two, might do her good. And the following morning she wrote again to say, in the most feeling language she could command, that she would call for her in the carriage at any hour that Jane would name, mentioning that she and Mr. Perry's decided opinion in favour of such exercise was his patient. The answer was only in this short note: Miss Fairfax's compliments and thanks, but it is quite unequal to any exercise. Emma felt that her note had deserved something better, but it was impossible to quarrel with words whose tremulous inequality shewed indisposition so plainly, and she thought only of how she might best counteract this unwillingness to be seen or assisted. In spite of the answer, therefore, she ordered the carriage, and drove to Mrs. Bates in the hope that Jane would be induced to join her. But it would not do. Miss Bates came to the carriage door, all gratitude, and agreeing with her most earnestly in thinking an airing might be the greatest service, and everything that message could do was tried, but all in vain. Miss Bates was obliged to return without success. Jane was quite unpersuadable. The mere proposal of going out seemed to make her worse. Emma wished she could have seen her, and tried her own powers, but almost before she could hint the wish, Miss Bates made it appear that she had promised her niece on no account to let Miss Woodhouse in. Indeed, the truth was that poor dear Jane could not bear to see anybody at all. Mrs. Elton, indeed, could not be denied, and Mrs. Cole had made such a point, and Mrs. Perry had said so much, but except them, Jane would really see nobody. Emma did not want to be classed with the Mrs. Eltons and the Mrs. Perrys and the Mrs. Coles, who would force themselves anywhere. Neither could she feel any right of preference herself. She submitted, therefore, and only questioned Miss Bates's father as to the niece's appetite and diet, which she longed to be able to assist. On that subject poor Miss Bates was very unhappy, very communicative. Jane would hardly eat anything. Mr. Perry recommended nourishing food, but everything they could command, and never had anybody such good neighbours, was distasteful. Emma, on reaching home, called the housekeeper directly to an examination of her stores, and some arrowroot of very superior quality was speedily dispatched to Miss Bates with a most friendly note. In half an hour the arrowroot was returned with 1,000 thanks from Miss Bates, but dear Jane would not be satisfied without its being sent back. It was a thing she could not take, and moreover she insisted on her saying that she was not at all in want of anything. When Emma afterwards heard that Jane Fairfax had been seen wandering about the meadows, at some distance from Highbury, on the afternoon of the very day on which she had, under the plea of being unequal to any exercise, so peremptorily refused to go out with her in the carriage, she could have no doubt, putting everything together, that Jane was resolved to receive no kindness from her. She was sorry, very sorry. Her heart was grieved for a state which seemed but the more pitiable from this sort of irritation of spirits, inconsistency of action and inequality of powers, and it mortified her that she was given so little credit for proper feeling, or esteemed so little worthy as a friend. But she had the consolation of knowing that her intentions were good, and of being able to say to herself that could Mr. Knightley have been privy to all her attempts of assisting Jane Fairfax, could he even have seen into her heart, he would not on this occasion have found anything to reprove.
Emma, written by Jane Austen, read by the staff of Birmingham Libraries, Volume 3, Chapter 10. One morning, about 10 days after Mrs. Churchill's decease, Emma was called downstairs to Mr. Weston, who could not stay 5 minutes and wanted particularly to speak to her. He met her at the parlour door, and hardly asking her how she did, in the natural key of his voice, sunk it immediately to say, unheard by her father, "Can you come to Randall's at any time this morning? Do, if it be possible. Mrs. Weston wants to see you. She must see you." "Is she unwell?" No, not at all. Only a little agitated. She would have ordered the carriage and come to you, but she must see you alone. And that, you know, nodding towards her father. Humph. Can you come? Certainly, this moment, if you please. It's impossible to refuse what you ask in such a way. But what can be the matter? Is she really not ill? Depend upon me, but ask no more questions. You will know it all in time. The most unaccountable business, but hush, hush. To guess what all this meant was impossible, even for Emma. Something really important seemed announced by his looks, but as her friend was well, she endeavoured not to be uneasy, and settling it with her father that she would take her walk now, she and Mr. Weston were soon out of the house together, and on their way at a quick pace for Randall's. "Now," said Emma, when they were fairly beyond the sweep gates. "Now, Mr. Weston, do let me know what's happened." No, he replied gravely. "Don't ask me. I promised my wife to leave it all to her. She will break it to you better than I can. Do not be impatient, Emma. It will all come out too soon." "Break it to me," cried Emma, standing still with terror. "Good God! Mr. Weston, Tell me at once. Something has happened in Brunswick Square. I know it has. Tell me, I charge you. Tell me this moment. What is it? No, indeed, you are mistaken. Mr. Weston, do not trifle with me. Consider how many of my dearest friends are now in Brunswick Square. Which of them is it? I charge you by all that is sacred not to attempt concealment. Upon my word, Emma. Your word? Why not your honour? Why not say upon your honour that it has nothing to do with any of them? Good heavens! What can be broke to me that does not relate to one of that family? Upon my honour, said he very seriously, it does not. It is not in the smallest degree connected with any human being of the name of Knightley. Emma's courage returned, and she walked on. I was wrong, he continued, in talking of it being broke to you. I should not have used the expression. In fact, it does not concern you. It concerns only myself. That is, we hope. Humph. In short, my dear Emma, there is no occasion to be so uneasy about it. I don't say that it is not a disagreeable business, but things might be much worse. If we walk fast, we shall soon be at Randalls. Emma found that she must wait, and now it was required little effort. She asked no more questions, therefore, merely employed her own fancy, and that soon pointed out to her the probability of it being some money concern, something just come to light, of a disagreeable nature in the circumstances of the family, something which the late event at Richmond had brought forwards. Her fancy was very active. Half a dozen natural children, perhaps, and poor Frank cut off. This thought, though was very undesirable, would be no matter of agony to her. It inspired little more than an animated curiosity. "Who is that gentleman on horseback?" said she, as they proceeded, speaking more to assist Mr. Weston in keeping his secret than with any other view. "I do not know. One of the Otways. Not Frank. It's not Frank, I assure you. You will not see him. He is half-way to Windsor by this time." "Has your son been with you, then?" "Oh, yes. Did you not know? Well, never mind." For a moment he was silent, and then added in a tone much more guarded and demure, "Yes. Frank came over this morning, just to ask us how we did." They hurried on, and were speedily at Randalls. "Well, my dear," said he, as they entered the room, "I have brought her, and now I hope you will soon be better. I shall leave you together. There is no use in delay. I shall not be far off if you want me." And Emma distinctly heard him add in a lower tone, before he quitted the room, "I have been as good as my word. She has not the least idea." Mrs. Weston was looking so ill, and had an air of so much perturbation, that Emma's uneasiness increased, and the moment they were alone, she eagerly said, "What is it, my dear friend? Something of a very unpleasant nature, I find, has occurred. Do let me know directly what it is. I have been walking all this way in complete suspense. We both abhor suspense. Do not let mine continue longer. It will do you good to speak of your distress, whatever it may be." "Have you indeed no idea?" said Mrs. Weston in a trembling voice. "Cannot you, my dear Emma, cannot you form a guess as to what you are to hear?" "So far as it relates to Mr. Frank Churchill, I do guess." "You are right. It does relate to him. And I'll tell you directly," resuming her work, and seeming resolved against looking up. "He has been here this very morning on a most extraordinary errand. It is impossible to express our surprise. He came to speak to his father on a subject, to announce an attachment." She stopped to breathe. Emma thought first of herself and then of Harriet. "More than an attachment, indeed," resumed Mrs. Weston. "An engagement, a positive engagement. What will you say, Emma? What will anybody say when it is known that Frank Churchill and Miss Fairfax are engaged? Nay, that they have been long engaged?" Emma even jumped with surprise, and horror-struck exclaimed, "Jane Fairfax? Good God! Are You're not serious? Do you mean it? You may well be amazed, returned Mrs. Weston, still averting her eyes, and talking on with great eagerness, that Emma might have time to recover. You may well be amazed, but it is even so. There has been a solemn engagement between them ever since October, formed at Weymouth, and kept secret from everybody, not a creature knowing it but themselves. Neither the Campbells, nor her family, nor his. It is so wonderful that though perfectly convinced of the fact, it is yet almost incredible to myself. I can hardly believe it. I thought I knew him. Emma scarcely heard what was said. Her mind was divided between two ideas, her own former conversations with him about Miss Fairfax, and poor Harriet. And for some time she could only exclaim and require confirmation, repeated confirmation. Well, said she at last, trying to recover herself, this is a circumstance which I must think of at least half a day before I can at all comprehend it. Was engaged to her all the winter before either of them came to Highbury? Engaged since October, secretly engaged. It has hurt me, Emma, very much. It has hurt his father equally. Some part of his conduct we cannot excuse. Emma pondered a moment, and then replied, I will not pretend not to understand you, and to give you all the relief in my power. Be assured that no such effect has followed his attentions to me as you are apprehensive of. Mrs. Weston looked up, afraid to believe, but Emma's countenance was as steady as her words. That you may have less difficulty in believing this boast of my present perfect indifference, she continued, I will further tell you that there was a period in the early part of our acquaintance when I did like him, when I was very much disposed to be attached to him, nay, was attached, and how it came to cease is perhaps the wonder. Fortunately, however, it did cease. I have really for some time, for at least these 3 months, cared nothing about him. You may believe me, Mrs. Weston. This is the simple truth. Mrs. Weston kissed her with tears of joy, and then she could find utterance assured her that this protestation had done her more good than anything else in the world could do. Mr. Weston will be almost as much relieved as myself, said she. On this point we have been wretched. It was our darling wish that you might be attached to each other, and we were persuaded that it was so. Imagine what we have been feeling on your account. I have escaped, and that I should escape may be matter of grateful wonder to you and myself. But this does not acquit him, Mrs. Weston, and I must say that I think him greatly to blame. What right had he to come among us with affections and faith engaged, and with manners so very disengaged? What right had he to endeavour to please, as he certainly did, to distinguish any one young woman with persevering attention, as he certainly did, while he really belonged to another? How could he tell what mischief he might be doing? How could he tell what he might not be making in love with him? Very wrong indeed. From something that he said, my dear Emma, I rather imagine. And how could she bear such behaviour? Composure with a witness, to look on while being repeated attentions were offering to another woman before her face, and not resent it. That is a degree of placidity which I can neither comprehend nor respect. There were misunderstandings between them, Emma. He said so expressly. He had not time to enter into much explanation. He was here only a quarter of an hour, and in a state of agitation which did not allow the full use even of the time he could stay. But that there had been misunderstandings, he decidedly said. The present crisis, indeed, seemed to be brought on by them, and those misunderstandings might very possibly arise from the impropriety of his conduct. Impropriety? Oh, Mrs. Weston, it is too calm a censure. Much much beyond impropriety. He has sunk him. I cannot say how it has sunk him, in my opinion. So unlike what a man should be, none of that upright integrity, that strict adherence to truth and principle, that disdain of trick and littleness, which a man should display in every transaction of his life. Nay, dear Emma, now I must take his part. Although he has been wrong in this instance, I have known him long enough to answer for his having many, very many good qualities, and—" "Good God!" cried Emma, not attending to her. "Mrs. Smallridge too! Jane actually on some point of going as governess! What could he mean by such horrible indelicacy? To suffer her to engage herself, to suffer her even to think of such a measure!" "He knew nothing of it, Emma. On this article I can fully acquit him. It was a private resolution of hers, not communicated to him, or at least not communicated in a way to carry conviction, till yesterday. I know he said he was in the dark as to her plans. They burst on him. I do not know how, but by some letter or message, and it was a discovery of what she was doing, of this very project of hers, which determined him to come forward at once, own it all to his uncle, throw himself on his kindness, and in short put an end to the miserable state of concealment that had been carrying on so long." Emma began to listen better. "I'm to hear from him soon," continued Mrs. Weston. "He told me at parting that he should soon write, and he spoke in a manner which seemed to promise me many particulars that could not be given now. Let us wait, therefore, for this letter. It may bring many extenuations. It may make many things intelligible and excusable, which now are not to be understood. Don't let us be too severe. Don't let us be in a hurry to condemn him. Let us have patience. I must love him. And now that I am satisfied on one point, the one material point I am sincerely anxious for, it's all turned out well, and ready to hope that it may. They must both have suffered a great deal under such a system of secrecy and concealment." "His sufferings," replied Emma dryly, "do not appear to have done him much harm. Well, and how did Mr. Churchill take it?" "Most favourably for his nephew. Gave his consent with scarcely a difficulty. Conceive what the events of a week have done in that family. While poor Mrs. Churchill lived, I suppose there could not have been a hope, a chance, or a possibility, but scarcely are her remains at rest in the family vault than her husband is persuaded to act exactly opposite to what she would have required. What a blessing it is when undue influence does not survive the grave. He gave his consent with very little persuasion." "Ah," thought Emma, "he would have done as much for Harriet." This was settled at last night, and Frank was off with the lighter this morning. He stopped at Highbury, at Bates's, I fancy, some time, and then came on hither, but was in such a hurry to get back to his uncle, to whom he is just now more necessary than ever, that, as I tell you, he could stay with us but a quarter of an hour. He was very much agitated, very much indeed, to a degree that made him appear quite a different creature from anything I had ever seen him before. In addition to all the rest, there had been the shock of finding her so very unwell, which he had no previous suspicion of, and there was every appearance of his having been feeling a great deal. And do you really believe the affair to have been carrying on with such a perfect secrecy? The Campbells, the Dixons, did none of them know of the engagement?" Emma could not speak the name of Dixon without a little blush. "None, not one. He positively said that it had been known to no being in the world but their two selves." "Well," said Emma, "I suppose we shall gradually grow reconciled to the idea, and I wish them very happy. But I shall always think it a very abominable sort of proceeding. What has it been but a system of hypocrisy and deceit, espionage and treachery, to come among us with professions of openness and simplicity, and such a league in secret to judge us all. Here have we been, the whole winter and spring, completely duped, fancying ourselves all on an equal footing of truth and honour, with two people in the midst of us who have been carrying round, comparing and sitting in judgment on sentiments and words that were never meant for both to hear. They must take the consequences if they have heard each other spoken of in a way not perfectly agreeable. I am quite easy on that head, replied Mrs. Weston. I am very sure that I never said anything of either to the other, which both might not have heard. You're in luck. Your only blunder was confined to my ear, when you imagined a certain friend of ours in love with a lady. True, but as I have always had a thoroughly good opinion of Mrs. Fairfax, I never could, under my any blunder, have spoken ill of her, and as to speaking ill of him, there I must have been safe. At this moment Mr. Weston appeared, at a little distance from the window, evidently on the watch. His wife gave him a look which invited him in, and while he was coming round, added, Now, dearest Emma, let me entreat you to say and look everything that may set his heart at ease, and incline him to be satisfied with the match. Let us make it the best of it, and indeed almost everything may be fairly said in her favour. It is not a connection to gratify, but if Mr. Churchill does not feel that, why should we? And it may be very fortunate circumstances for him, for Frank, I mean, that he should have attached himself to a girl of such steadiness of character and good judgment as I have always given her the credit for, and still am disposed to give her the credit for, in spite of this one great deviation from the strict rule of right. And now much may be said in her situation for even that error. Much indeed, cried Emma feelingly. If a woman can ever be excused for thinking only of herself, it is in a situation like Jane Fairfax's. Oh, such one may almost say that the world is not theirs nor the world's law. She met Mr. Weston on his entrance with a smiling countenance, exclaiming, A very pretty trick you have been playing me, upon my word. This was a device, I suppose, to sport with my curiosity and exercise my talent of guessing. But you really frightened me. I thought you had lost half your property at least. And here, instead of being a matter of condolence, it turns out to be one of my congratulation. I congratulate you, Mr. Weston, with all my heart on the prospects of having one of the most lovely and accomplished young women in England for your daughter. A glance or two between him and his wife convinced him that all was as right as this speech proclaimed, and its happy effect on his spirits was immediate. His air and voice recovered their usual briskness. He shook her heartily and gratefully by the hand, and entered on the subject in a manner to prove that he now only wanted time and persuasion to think the engagement no very bad thing. His companion suggested only what could palliate imprudence, or could smooth objections, and by the time they had talked it all over together, and he had talked it over again with Emma in their walk back to Hartfield, he was become perfectly reconciled, and not far from thinking it the very best thing that Frank could possibly have done.